Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon. As you can see, that was a very recent picture, only taken yesterday. So I'm going to spend 20 minutes or something to talk about generative AI. Now, before I go into the content, I see a lot of familiar faces, but I would like to check a little bit on how equipped everyone is on GenAI at the moment. So who has read up a little bit on GenAI, has sort of an understanding of what it does or what it doesn't do? Any hands? Okay. Who would consider themselves an expert on GenAI? Okay, great. Okay, then I think it will pretty much fit. So what I'll do is I'll give you a bit of a view on how we look at GenAI as a capability, as a technology, but then also how it fits on supply chain transformation. Now, as a starting point, within Accenture, we do, every 2 years, we do a benchmark on how do you make digital transformation happen. And the main conclusion, if you look at those companies that have been able to really transform and to have sort of equipped their value chains with a lot of digital enablement, they've done 3 things right. And those are the 3 things that you see on the page here. So the first one is, how do you, in the end, make data work for yourself? I think everyone here has struggled with data, I'm sure, right? So how do you not only, in the end, get to the point that you can make your data available, but also you have the ability to create insights. That's the one first aspect you need to get right. The second one, and I think it came also back in some of the panels earlier on, it is very much about the talent aspect as well. So you can do technology, but without talent, it will not fly. So the people aspect, skills, in the end, how do you build skills, what type of profiles do you need, extremely important to make it happen. And then the third one, scaling. So you need to have value focus, of course, but you also need to make the right choices. So how do you choose, of all the technology options that are out there, the ones that in the end can scale? And you sort of get out of your proof of concept and pilot stage, and you really get to 80–90% of the business. Those are the 3 things. If you get these right, you can actually run a digital transformation. Now, obviously, if you look at this, the combination of value focus and in the end data and insights, that's where generative AI comes into place. And I'll start a little bit with sort of the iPhone moment. So when ChatGPT started to become a thing, and we all started to test it online, there was one major thing that was different from everything we did in applied intelligence before. And that is that suddenly it became understandable. So instead of having to work with algorithms where you could see the results, but you could not really understand how the results were actually getting there, you could now have a conversation, you could ask a question, you get an answer in normal English, and you could actually understand the answer. That's the key difference that ChatGPT brought, and that opened the door for GenAI. Now, the other major development has been that let's call them traditional applied intelligence methods, are there to use data and in the end create a result. But it's very much leveraging the data you have available. With GenAI, you create new content. So you work with the data pools, and I will tell you there's more data pools to work with, but the content that is created is new content. And it follows a certain logic and intelligence to get to something that adds more value than before. But we'll get to that point. So why is this so different than before? We start with data. So data, as we all know, is challenging, but often our majority of effort on making data work goes into the structural part of this. So how do we get data out of SAP? How do we get it out of Coupa, out of our planning systems? How do we make sure it's complete and accurate? Absorbs all of our time. But in reality, there's a lot more out there that you can use, and this is where GenAI comes into place. So if you think about emails, Word documents, Excel files, the internet, tons and tons of unstructured data. What GenAI in the end does is make that unstructured data structured and make it work for you. And that's where the big difference is. So if we get this concept, then the 3 steps on the bottom are the really important ones. So first of all, if this is my universe of data, how do I create the structured data that I need? First step. And that's where, of course, you start using the algorithm. Second one is, if I have the data in a structured way, let me draft my initial content. So I've asked questions, I'm going to get initial content that gives me a first view of the response. I then start fine-tuning. I understand which data I need to build it. And then I go into the third step. And this is where the content that I have actually gets assessed, again by the algorithm, on consistency, on compliance, does it fit with legal requirements we have in the company, etc. All of that can be done in the end with this technology. So those are typically the 3 steps you need to go through, and then you can get GenAI to work for you. Now, all fine. Seems a bit like very far away for some of us. What does it really mean when we talk about supply chain? Now, we've done some research on the impact of GenAI on end-to-end value chains. So think everything from inbound up to final delivery and service management. A couple of numbers that I will change with the group, that I will share with the group. So first of all, if you look at all the processes we run in supply chains, we believe that close to 60% of those will be affected by GenAI at some point. For some of it could be already in the next half year, for others it might be in 2 or 3 years' time. But close to 60% will be affected by GenAI. If you look at what does that really mean if we get there, it means that from all the capacity you have on running a value chain, you will be able to free up somewhere around 20%. That doesn't mean that you need necessarily less people, but it means that you become more intelligent on the execution. Very important part. Now, secondly, the people component. So if you know that GenAI can affect all those processes, what does it mean for all the people that work in supply chain? For us, for the teams, etc. It means that around half of the roles in supply chain will be affected by GenAI. It means, to some extent, just working with different tools and inputs, to other extents, really reskilling of the workforce that you have available. So it's a great opportunity, but it's an opportunity that requires a shift in how you look at talent. And that's the second point. Then on the technology side, the key aspect here is if you are well equipped on data, on handling your internal data, your structural data sources, you have a data lake, you have an architecture in place, all that sort of stuff, that is a great starting point to then, in essence, open the gate and start using unstructured external data. Comes with a lot of challenges, security, all that sort of stuff, but in essence, that allows you to start using the power of something like GenAI. You need that type of an architecture, you need the ability to handle huge amounts of data in the architecture you have in place, and then you can go into this direction. Now, process, people, technology, that's all in what we call the capability world. But then you also have the physical side of the supply chain. And there you will see that if you get GenAI to work for you, if you apply it in a big set of the processes that you have within your organization, it also means that your manufacturing footprint, your DC structure, will become more effective and efficient. So there you can see less waste, you can see better sustainability impact, etc., all enabled by the intelligence, by the insights you create in the end with GenAI. And that gives you an overall view in supply chain. What do we expect the impact of GenAI moving forward? Now, I would be lying if I said there's already 20, 30 companies that are very far on this journey. This is early technology, but it should be at the top of mind if we are thinking on 3 to 5 year plans. Because that's in reality where the best in class are very much looking at. Now, to give you a bit of an example, I wanted to talk a little bit about planning. I mean, we're here today with O9, so I think it's fitting to talk about planning. I'll give you a couple of examples of problems that those of us who work in the planning space experience day in, day out, and how we expect that GenAI, in the end, addresses these moving forward. So the first one, if you have a situation where you work with machine learning, And granted, not everyone already has machine learning in place, but for those that have machine learning, one of the big problems is always, how do you explain the black box? And should you want to explain the black box? So the business, the planners, they want to understand how the algorithm works. In traditional AI technology, that's very difficult to do and almost impossible. It will slow your transformation down dramatically. With GenAI, you can go into conversational mode on applied intelligence. So you can ask questions, explain me why it does this and this and this. You get an answer in normal English. And therefore you can start to explain how a planning model works and what the benefit is for the business. It's a huge eye-opener. It takes a lot of noise out of the system if you talk about aligning a plan. The second one, how many times do you get an email with a great idea? You know, we should be doing this and this and this, and why didn't we think about this to address the shortage we had in product A whatsoever? Those emails are often very valuable, but not used. And what you in the end are able to do with specific focus on the number of unstructured sources is you can start screen those sources for useful information to update the quality of the plan. So suddenly you can grasp the idea. You can use it to, in the end, improve the quality of the plan moving forward. It's a great change to where typically we are today. Now the last one I will do is the one on the bottom, because planning is partially execution, but partially it's continuous improvement. Your plan is never going to be perfect, so there always needs to be focus on improving the plan. And also that is done drastically different once you have GenAI as a capability at hand. So in the traditional way of working, how do we drive continuous improvement? We analyze. We take downloads, we put it in Excel, we analyze data, we get to ideas, we try to improve, and we check the cycle afterwards. In the world of GenAI, we ask the question. And we, in the end, use the capability to look at large amounts of words to get to an outcome that we can understand. So also continuous improvement becomes more understandable and less driven by, let's call it, the world of Excel. Now, I do want to balance this a little bit. It is very hard work to get GenAI to work. This is not a miracle solution. You switch it on and it gets there. So the reality is, yes, it can do great things for you, but it takes time. It takes a lot of smart people to get it done, and it does take quite a bit of effort to get there. So what I want to end with, and then I open it up for some questions from the group, is what are now really the key success factors in the world of GenAI? So the first one, very clear, you need data. So having, in the end, the right investments to look at data quality, to look at data completeness, to have the ability to use unstructured data from outside is the basis. It's really the starting point to get this to work. Then secondly, you need to have a culture in the organization that allows you to sometimes fail. Because you will try things, you sometimes will be very successful, and other times you will fail and you sort of scrap it and you move on. So in working with this type of a capability, the drive to innovate, the drive to test and to try things is very important. The third one, still a bit of an area in development, I would say, ethics and compliance. Particular when you talk about using unstructured data from outside is really important. So how do you get the right starting point to make sure that somewhere down the road you're not going to be attacked by a data breach, by a security breach? So a very important aspect on GenAI. Then, as I mentioned earlier on, this is not cheap. Right? It has a huge impact on infrastructural cost. It has a huge impact on, in the end, the architectural setup that you need. So you need to be willing to make the investments to do this in the right way. And then the last one is the focus on value tracking. It cannot become a hobby horse. What you often see with organizations, and also with some of the clients that I've worked with in the past, is that they have a team that does analytics, and they do applied intelligence, and they like to do proof of concepts. and they try things, and they get some results. Sometimes it doesn't get there. But in the end, it becomes more of a hobby horse to try new things, and the focus on the value slowly disappears a little bit. How do we keep the data scientists busy becomes more important than, in the end, creating the right impact for the business. And the impact of the business still needs to be leading, also on GenAI. So the focus on which processes, what is the value behind, what is there for the business case of the transformation I need to drive, is a key thing in the end of making GenAI a sustainable capability in your company. And so that gives you a view of some of the key success factors. So with that, I want to open it up for some questions or comments from the group. Anyone?
Simple question.
Oh, yeah.
The way you presented it to us was like, this is already happening, this is existing, this is in a business. GenAI exists. I haven't seen much of that.
No, so there is not, I don't think there's a company that is structurally applying this at the moment. But if you look at some of the leading companies and their sort of 3 to 5 year plan on where they want to go, GenAI is in. There are some early movers that have started with, I would say, POCs, but scalable implementation at the moment, I haven't seen yet, right? But I think when we are 6 to 9 months down the road, the first ones will be there. I think that's a bit where we are. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
I have several major investment projects that I have to convince my CFO to fund, my CEO. What would be the most compelling argument to actually say, okay, let's drop some money into this particular topic, as opposed to all the other key operational, let's say, critical projects that need to be supported and delivered?
Yeah. So I think there's two aspects that are really important, and then behind it there's a question on how ready are you to enable that. So the aspects that in my view are really important is the first one, do you believe that for the investments or the value that needs to be created for the company, in the end, having insights, having analytics is a key factor. Why is that important? Because often the answer to the question will be, yes, of course we need insights, and yes, we need analytics. But what we see happening is you have a few organizations that find it very okay to have analytics, and they don't really know what happens and how it works, and they just look at the result. The majority of organizations find that very difficult. So if you are in an organization that has sort of the insight-driven mindset, but in reality has a culture or has sort of a trust equation where they do want to know exactly what is going on, then this is the type of capability that, first of all, allows you to make analytics understandable for everyone. Second of all, it then allows you to bring analytics to the next level because you can open up more data sources. So that's the first part of I think the one that you need to be able to tick off. I think the second one is then very much around, do you believe that in the organization this is a capability that you want to sustain? Because it does come with significant cost, it does come with significant effort. At the moment you're an early mover. So if you're 5 years down the road, for sure this whole thing will become more efficient and more cost efficient, but if you do it now, you're ahead of the game and you're ahead of your competitors. So that's the trade-off you need to make, and that often depends on the culture you have as an organization. If your culture is, we're early movers, then this is the right time to get in. If your culture is, well, we're kind of very risk averse, we like to see other ones do it, and then at some point we step in, then probably this is something for in 2-3 years' time. Now, on the enablement side, there is the data question. If you are nowhere on data architecture, data quality, all those type of things, the journey to get here is long. Right? So that's, I think, some of the trade-offs that I would think about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yep.
What 3 areas do you see to be the first to be implemented in supply chain?
Very good question. So we have we also have a more elaborate view that answers that question, but I think to give you my view on the three key areas, I think the first one is in the area of forecasting and demand planning. And that's very simple. I think those of us that are on a journey to leverage analytics in that space, they are using drivers. You can use way more drivers and way more unstructured data if you take this route. So that's the first area. The second area, if we think about, again, still in the planning space, but decision making, both on short term and mid term. So call it IBP, call it SNOE, SNOP. We try to make our decisions in an insight-driven way. Now, I mentioned the example about emails earlier on. This allows you to create more insights, to have more, in the end, comments, opinions available to drive your decisions. So that's a second key area where we would expect an impact. The third one is in the area of sustainability. So if you think about where a lot of us are on sustainability, we are sort of in the reporting stage. We have targets, and we are able to have metrics, and we report on the metrics, and then we try to make the targets. In the end, this also allows you to open up that area and start including that more and more on how you drive the end-to-end supply chain. Now, for me, those are the three areas that are a little bit top of mind at the moment, but as I said, there are more. Yeah?
One follow-up question. You mentioned opinion emails.
Yeah.
We're driving data, facts, and
Yeah.
now you're saying opinion.
Yeah. So when I spoke about how does it work, I spoke about the 3 steps. So what you do, step 1, you take all the data and you structure it. So I take the email with the opinion and I structure it. Then the second step, I start to write my story. So I get the first draft of, okay, this is what I think we should be doing. And then the third step is that you start to look at consistency. So there's a fact check that takes place. You start to look at compliance, and then you come with your final answer. So somewhere in step 2 and 3, I check if this was an opinion or if this was actually something that has consistency, has factual background, and therefore I use it in the answer.
Promise last follow-up question.
Yeah.
So you're actually going into raw data and asking whatever it's called, give me the raw data on that assumption that you made to derive the decision?
So you use the data sources you make available for the algorithm, which is a combination of structural sources of record you have in a company and a list of external, unstructural sources that you decide to use. Now, it could be that you have certain mailboxes that you also want to use, that are part of the unstructural set, and then you try to use whichever data you have available to validate what that, in the end, that comment was. And was it an opinion, or was this actually a great idea that has facts behind? Yeah? But you're always in charge yourself of sources, and in the end, the data types that you want to use of each of the sources that you control. Yeah? Last question, then we need to stop.
How would you navigate the GDPR compliance? Because a lot of unstructured data, you are utilizing the mails and everything, and that
Yeah.
might infringe GDPR. So how do you?
Yeah. Yeah, so what we do so far is that we work with a setup where personal mailboxes you do not use, but mailboxes are linked into a workflow, that are linked into running, for example, an IBP, those you do use. And there you take, in the end, the inputs that were provided and you work with them. Now, if you want to go further than that, you need to indeed go through a whole process so that people understand what would be happening. I have not seen a company so far that went there. Yeah. I think...
One question here.
Hi
there.
Hey.
Ryan from Simple Business Company.
Hello.
Question, double-click on the compute part of this. Right, what's your perspective on what's driving the cost down for compute, and where do you see that ready for mass market?
Look, I mean, in the end, the cost of this, so I would say that there's 2 parts. The cost of the infrastructure, in the end, we know which curve that goes through, right? And I think that is affected. So that's affecting in the end the cost of running GenAI because it uses a lot of computing power to do it, right? So if you think about sizing, it has a huge impact. Now, on the other hand, a lot of the capability you can run in GenAI, you can run cloud-based, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be your own infrastructure. You can also work with service providers. You can work in the end with niche players that give you certain algorithms. So there's options you can do to leverage it. But the reality is that this is not a cheap capability to run. So do I think over time costs will go down? I expect yes. But still you need to take into account that doing this compared to sort of the traditional way of working, it requires a larger infrastructural cost.